After many years of impressive double-digit growth for just about every craft brewery in the United States, things started to normalize last year. Category-wide production grew just 6%. About half of the top 50 brewers were either flat or in decline, and about 35% of regional breweries, and that's those producing between 15,000 and 6 million barrels, didn't grow last year. As an industry, as I mentioned earlier this morning, we're really great at identifying reasons why the numbers are the way they are. You know, it's the weather, it's harder to grow on a larger base. Those figures don't factor in all the beer being sold in tap rooms. Consumers are overwhelmed with too much choice and drinking wine and spirits instead. If you counted all the production from breweries that were acquired, craft would have even bigger market share. We have a lot of ways to explain this stuff. But are those explanations or are they excuses? I'm not really sure. I do know this. Competition within craft is fierce, growth opportunities are getting more difficult to identify, and there are some obvious headwinds making it more challenging for smaller and emerging players to scale. So in the interest of trying to better understand how craft brewers are dealing with some of those challenges, and to understand what the future of craft could look like, we invited three incredibly smart and forward-thinking individuals to discuss the various ways this industry is evolving and how each of their businesses are dealing with some of that change. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Bell's Brewery CEO Laura Bell, Founders Brewing co-founder and CEO Mike Stevens, and Heavy Seas founder Hugh Sisson. Guys. Sure. Mike, thanks for wearing a t-shirt. I'm glad I'm not the only one on stage with one today.
There you go.
Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Happy to have you here. All right, let's jump right in. At the CBC earlier this year, Allagash founder Rob Todd said the business was in the midst of a tectonic shift. A few days before that, there was the New York Times op-ed from Jim Koch that had a headline that questioned whether or not it was last call for craft beer. And in general, I think sort of the sense or a feeling that I see from a lot of folks is that the future is sort of uncertain right now. And I'm curious how you guys are feeling about the current state of the industry now that it's more mature, and what concerns you about the future of beer. And I'll start with Laura.
Oh, gosh. So I've got
You shouldn't have sat so close.
I know. I'll get my crystal ball.
You got called up first.
Yeah, right. So I think when I think about where we are right now, craft is in a little bit of an identity crisis. You know, craft used to have this definition of exactly what it meant. Really, people looked to the BA for that definition. And now, as we're moving into over 5,000 different breweries that all have different models, different ownership structures, different customer, what does craft really mean? Who owns who? What are you making? We don't know. We don't have a good answer for what that means. So I think craft is in a place that needs to be defined a little bit more. Yeah, that was kind of a ramble. Someone else?
No, yeah, I think for us, part of it, we've been doing it now for 20 years, and I look at it, and when we started, everybody was called a microbrewery, and now we're called craft, or maybe next we'll be independent, or whatever it might be. But I look at it, and at Founders we talk a lot about, you've got kind of you've got this craft circle that we all live in, and we have to kind of, I think, start looking outside of this circle. You can only sell so much here, in your next circle you start talking about maybe your Sam Adams, your Lion & Kugels, and then you get to your imports, and then you get to your big domestics. And I see a world of craft where, so to answer directly to your question, am I concerned? No. And I think there's a huge amount of opportunity, but we have to stop trying to put it all in a box. I struggle with the confinement of the box. I struggle with why the hell can't craft do, why can't a craft brewery do 10 million barrels? What's wrong with that?
Sounds good to me.
Why on God's earth would that be a bad thing?
Right.
So to put a ceiling on something, to me, seems quite the opposite of what you want to do within an industry. So I think what we have to do as craft brewers, and I speak mostly from a perspective of, the larger breweries, those that might be doing 500,000 to 1 million barrels, it's our responsibility to start thinking outside of the little craft circle that we once started in. We have to make way for the up-and-coming brewers, and the only way to make way for that is to punch through the damn ceiling. And the only way to do that is to start thinking about, should craft only sell to craft? And do we need to start looking at consumers outside of that small bubble? And do we need to think about what those price points need to look like and what those beer styles need to look like? And do we have to start appealing to a broader audience? And are you ready, as a larger brewer, to say yes and to go there?
So I do want to get back to that, but I want to hear from Hugh first, just on your general thoughts on the state of the industry right now, and do you have any concerns about where the future of beer is headed?
To pick up on what you were just saying, I started doing this back in 1989, and at that point in time, and I think for probably the 20 years after that, craft defined itself as being the polar opposite of big beer. And as the industry has matured, it's the beer industry, and we are struggling trying to learn how to play within the confines of the beer industry. So we're not fighting against members of our industry. There's still going to be issues, but I think that's just a natural maturation process. And we're having growing pains. And typically when you have growing pains, shit happens. So I think we're in that shit happens moment right now. And I'm still pretty bullish. But we all now it's time to up your game. Get better at the marketing, get better at the branding. You can't do this stuff from the seat of your pants anymore. If you don't have a fucking lab, get out of the business. You got to dial it up.
Yeah. Mike, you talked about punching through the ceiling and kind of breaking through. I'm curious to learn from each of you guys, in what specific ways you guys are trying to accomplish that. And I'll start with Laura again. What ways is Bell's trying to kind of punch through that ceiling, be it with products or with packaging or pricing structures? What are the ways that sort of actually manifests itself in the day-to-day?
Sure. So when my dad started in 1985, we didn't have a whole lot, right? So a lot of our packaging and process was kind of made up with what we could get for free or who was willing to trade beer for something. And over the last 30 years, a lot of those things have just stayed in place because you get busy and you want to make sure you're meeting customer demand, so you don't think about some of those other things, like packaging is a big part of it. So what we're doing is we're really taking a step back to say, okay, what are the things that we've always done? Is this the best way to do it? And if we can prove it's the best way, we'll keep doing it. And if not, whether that be through beers we make or capital investment, what are those things that we can take and grow? So it's been a couple of years of us really taking a step back and looking at every single aspect of our business and what's worked for us, how we stay true to that, and then also how do we take it to the next level, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for us, similar to what Laura's saying, we kind of looked at two things. One was product, and the other was just professionalism in terms of how we do things with our systems and our processes, in particular, how it touches a wholesaler. We really dissected, obviously, pack size and things like that, and came out with the 15-pack, and we went into cans, and we did, we started to look at, we do a ton of beers, as everyone knows, that are high ABV, and, we still live in that extreme beer world, but, we purposefully came out with all day. We recognized that people were looking for a lower ABV beer, but it still needed to be, centered around kind of a craft profile. So we attacked that, but I would say just as equally important is, wholesalers are inundated today, and I don't want to say they don't want to sell your beer, because they do, believe me, they do, only if you make it easy for them to sell your beer. So we realized that you really had to come to an ABP meeting with all your shit in a pile, not just part of it. And you had to break down every SKU by month. You had to have a marketing plan that meant something. You had to show the capital investments that you were going to bring to the table. You had to get your pricing in line. You have to hit the sweet spots there. You've got to, at the end of the day, walk out of that meeting and be able to look the wholesaler in the eye, and he's got to be able to look at you and say, shit. You know, I wish everybody would come together with a plan like that. So we got as detailed as we could so that there would not be any, you know, fight back from them to say, you know, well, I don't get it. How are we going to do this? Well, this is exactly how we're going to do it. Because I honestly remember the days when you'd walk into your wholesaler and say, well, what do you think, Jim? 20%? You know, so now we kind of work it from the bottom up, and we show them a very detailed plan that shows them how they're going to get to 20%. Answer every question before they ask it.
Yeah.
You know, so that was very, very helpful for us.
Yeah, meeting the objections and the obstacles sort of head on.
Yep. They have too much to sell.
Yep.
And that's exactly what I meant by we have to dial up our game. I mean, we're spending, you know, as long as I've been doing this, I keep realizing how much I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So, and
maybe you should sell.
But the point is, are you buying?
Do you know anyone, Mike?
But you have to acknowledge the fact that you're never going to know it all. And being in rooms like this and talking to lots of people is advantageous. And you know, we're constantly looking at the way we do things. Just to pick up what you were saying, Laura, you know, how do we do this better? Gee, and you have to be candid with yourself. You know, did it work? Did it not work? You know, who's outflanking us, and are they outflanking us because they've got more brain cells than we do? Are they outworking us? And yeah, I mean, just you have to be willing to be in a constant position of reinventing yourself, whether it's product, go-to-market strategies, reinvestment, or humility.
So what does that reinvention look like for Heavy Seas?
Well, we're acknowledging the fact that becoming a national brand is probably never going to be in the cards. And so we're focusing our geography on where we can stay relevant, and then trying to find ways to how do we become more relevant, how do we tell the story better. We're definitely focusing on product innovation, but understanding that when you're just, because the distributors are key, you know, the distributors have got way too much crap on their plate. So if you're going to walk in the door with a new SKU, you better be walking in the door with a plan that removes an SKU, minimum. Because they've already got more than they can manage. So it's almost, not to keep beating the same theme, but it's you know, it's just focusing on blocking and tackling, because that's how this industry gets built. You know, seeing the people, listening, and then being willing to change.
Brick by brick, huh?
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean, you know, my customer base has loyalty to me of 1 6-pack. And the day I forget that, I'm toast.
Yep. That's clearly, you know, a big sign that the category itself has matured. What are some other signs for you guys that, you know, are super noticeable over the last 12 to 18 months that you can point to and say, you know, this is, you know, markedly different than the way things used to be?
Hugh made me think of something when he said, if you don't have a lab, get out of the business.
Yeah.
And we're seeing, and I think this is a great sign of maturity, that retailers are actually asking about labs now.
Yep.
So we have retailers that are saying, talk to us about your quality program. Talk to us about what your lab looks like. How do you guys work through some of these processes at the brewery? Because they also understand that quality beer is going to sell, that they need to rely on their suppliers to make sure that what they've got on the shelf is worthwhile and worth what they're asking for. And you know, I think for our consumers, it was a lot easier to spend that $10 on something that was new and different and exciting, but you can only get burned so many times before you want to take that $10 and spend it on something that you know that you can rely on. So I think having that dialogue with retailers is a big step and something that shows industry maturity a lot, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting. How do you think that will play itself out over, the next couple resets? I feel like retailers really ran pretty hard at, small and local and almost over-skewed in a sense, just trying to grab everything that came their way. Do you guys feel like the pendulum is kind of swinging back? And we've heard time and time again on earnings calls that retailers are eventually going to swing back and start supporting the larger, more established brands again. Is that happening?
Yeah, I'm seeing, over the last 12 to 18 months, and, certainly on both the wholesaler side and retailer side, I think they want to see less SKUs. Mm-hmm. I know the wholesalers for sure would appreciate less beer. And definitely, we've had, obviously conversations with buyers that are looking for, what are you really focused on? Give me your 3 or 4. And that's why I think, I'm all about innovation, and Founders definitely, has a pipeline going there. But what we're not about is innovation for innovation. Mm-hmm. That's kind of bullshit. What you really need to do is focus on building a brand. When you have something that's selling, say, 25,000 barrels of a IPA X, and then to see rate of sales start to stagnate and then just decide to dump another one in its place, you're starting at a base of 0, and you got to get back up to 25,000 before you can even say, I'm there. And then you look at your rate of sales and start to go, oh, well, I really didn't do much there. Well, you're better off looking at what can you do now with that brand that you've had for the last 5, 6, 10, 15 years, and saying, how can I take capital and put it into it and maybe invigorate it, and at least go through those steps, whether it's a redesign or a new pack or a new pack style, and other campaign dollars and a marketing spiff. I think eventually we're going to start to see, at least on the bigger brewery side, is more focus towards 3, 4 brands and less 28 SKUs.
I think retailers know where their dollars come from too, as well. So if you've got a certain amount of tap handles or shelf space, and you've got those 3 or 4 core flagships from those leading breweries, and you're trying to rotate through, everything that's new from other breweries, and it may or may not be quality, having those strong brands for them is important. For their bottom line as well, and being able to focus on that and have that conversation.
Yeah, we look at our, as we look at our numbers throughout the whole United States, we average, last time I looked, 2.8 facings, per effective placement. So that just tells you, you typically don't get 8 facings.
Right. Correct. That's I'm definitely noticing, first and foremost on the distributor side, but more and more on the retail side. The period of rampant promiscuity is coming to an end. Mm-hmm. They're focusing on, is the velocities there? On-premise is a little slower to pick this up. We're still dealing with massive rotation nation. Nothing pisses me off more than you sell them in a keg of X, it's gone in 2 days and you're off.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and it's
Greg,
like, hello.
Mark, Johnny.
Last time I looked, you were here to make money. And if the product has velocity, you put it back. Yeah. But right now that's market reality, especially in the on-premise segment.
Yeah. How have you guys adapted to that reality?
You try to create a limited amount of sort of one-off draft-only products, because if you can convince the retailer that, I can hold that handle and I'll keep pumping you full of stuff that's interesting, then maybe you can begin to hold that. But that only works if you're working on a very finite footprint. If you're trying to do that on a national thing, or a large regional thing, it's just too cumbersome. You've got too many regulations in terms of trying to get products authorized for various things. So it's a challenge. Yeah. The retailer is going to get tired of throwing out bad beer.
Yeah.
And that is when we hit the tipping point.
Interesting. It does seem like there is quite a bit of tension, just between this notion of, wanting to remain patient and reinvest in some of the brands, like you said, Mike, that have been around for 5, 6, 10 years. And I don't know if it's a desire or sort of a necessity, to have to give retailers this constant rotating lineup, and just in order to keep a tap handle or to keep a placement. And those are like opposing forces that are kind of butting heads right now. Which one wins in the end, and at what point do we determine a victor?
Whoa.
If you're still standing.
Yeah.
I don't know if it ever goes away, because I think that's the land of exploration there, and it should be. So I don't necessarily think Rotation Nation is wrong, but I do think there'll be a balance. I can't remember if it was Mark or Greg kind of brought it up, that what kind of happens is the old standbys find a home there. In our situation, when we go to on-premise, we don't come and say, here's our whole portfolio, let's pick a beer. It's here's all day, let's get it on, and then yeah, sure, if KBS or some other crazy beers can come your way, if you're that type of a facility, we definitely work those programs in. But for the most part, we have a very limited focus because we're trying to represent something from the brewery, but we still need that other half of that lineup just to be burning and churning. But at the end of the day, as Hugh said, I mean, what we're seeing on-premise and off-premise more and more is that buyer, that retailer, that whomever that's selling that beer is really starting to focus more and more on rates of sale. Mm-hmm. That's how they make money. I mean, you got to turn it and turn it and turn it. So, I think it balances out. It'll probably not be as bad as it is currently 5 years from now, but it will and should always be there.
And patience is a virtue.
Yeah. Something I think about with the proliferation of a lot of new breweries, and I'm sure you guys know this well, that making the same beer over and over and over again is a lot harder than making one-offs and specialties and throwing shit in a kettle and hoping that it works and calling it special and giving it to a retailer. Truly. And I think Rotation Nation really fundamentally started because of all the new breweries that aren't trying to make a consistent flagship, that are putting out new and different beers constantly. So retailers get trained, our customers get excited, and now we've got this snowball that is rolling. And sometimes I wonder how long that sustained innovation and one-offs and not focusing on a flagship, how long is that really practical?
Yeah, but it's a tough battle because I just think of, we didn't have all day until 16 years into our business, so we were the ones flying everywhere. So I kind of get it too. I mean, I do understand the smaller breweries that are just trying to find their place. So you do throw shit on the wall until something sticks. You kind of do. That's the program.
I'm not saying it's wrong. We've gotten into this pattern now of expectation. And
there's a lot more breweries throwing shit on the wall, and they should.
But in an era of flagship fatigue, you're never going to get the scale unless you create a flagship.
Right.
Correct.
So
correct.
That's part of the challenge that we're seeing right now with 5,000 breweries is that, if you're in the Baltimore metro and you're trying to launch an IPA, I've already got that. So I mean, I'm just telling you, you're going to have to reinvent.
Everybody should buy NBC's IPA. Nobody else.
Just get out of here.
No. I'm not talking about that per se, but I'm talking if you're a brand new startup and you're trying to do that, I'm standing there, you're standing there, you're standing there, and so they have to create something which allows them to be different from the companies that have earned that spot to get in. So that's part of what's generating all this. The question is, how sustainable is it? How many peanut butter jalapeno porters do you need? I mean, that's the truth.
But also that without a lab that you're putting into a bottle on a warm shelf that with a date code.
And so when you have the metaphor of exploding cans, I've seen a whole bunch of stuff about that lately. So Dan said it earlier today. This business is hard. You got to be willing to deal with difficult.
Yeah. There's certainly a lot to unpack there.
We didn't even have any beer before this either.
Let me see if I can
fix that.
try. Some of those businesses, I would argue, are inherently structured to not scale in many ways, right? So the advantage that they have, and their sort of playbook is to do exactly that: offer thousands of different beers that are constantly rotating and never produced more than one time, because they're focused so heavily on direct-to-consumer or taproom sales, or just the high spotting of the really high-end beer bars around town. What's the ceiling for that business model, and how many of those breweries can the industry really support in the long term, do you guys feel?
Well, it depends on if some of us larger ones break through the ceiling and make room.
Yeah.
That's a good point. No, seriously, that's a good point.
I mean, it's like a pint glass, right? And you want to fill it up with a beer, and as you fill that pint glass up, this is our craft circle. If people can't get to an outer circle and put yet another pint glass down, you're going to open up the next glass of beer and pour it in this pint, and the beer's going to overflow and go to the drain.
Right.
If no one can get another pint glass on that table and fill it up with beer, we will have a ceiling that we're going to hit. So we have to continue to grow this thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what industry is about. That's what growth is all about. That's the future. It has to be.
So how do we have enthusiasm for beer? We keep hearing that wine and spirits and cocktails are eating at lunch, and the sparklings, LaCroix of the world, or boozy LaCroix, or whatever it is. So how do we, as an industry, promote and have people excited about beer, be that the flagship or constantly,
I think there's people outside of the circle that to answer that question, Laura, I think there's people outside of the circle that actually, the big guys have lost market share for years and years. Yes, they go to wine and spirits, but I think there's still a chunk of them that are just sick of the beer that they're being offered. And we have to somehow get them to transition. And that might be with, marketing campaigns, and yes, lots of dollars, and maybe we have to make less margin to reach them, but we have to be willing to do that. And we might have to look at price points. We might have to look at the very products and styles that we're making to pull some of them in. And I'm not saying give up on what you do. Craft is craft, and craft should always be craft. But by God, why can't craft have 51% market share? I mean, for us to be pessimistic in the room about, we're all, Skewmageddon. Well, Skewmageddon, we're talking about Skewmageddon amongst ourselves. When 12 feet down that aisle is 85% of all beer sold in America.
Yep.
Let's go to the other side of the fence. Let's go raise hell on them. I mean,
I'd rather take responsibility. You brought up the op-ed from Jim Cook, and yes, certainly there are big players, and there are forces that we can't control, but really it's our responsibility. Instead of pointing fingers to say, well, they're doing this, so I can't. It's how do you navigate that and stay true to who you are? We're an independently owned family brewery, so there are things that are important to us. And we're going to do those, and we're going to take responsibility and figure out how to, be able to navigate the industry.
Yeah.
And
so you talk about reaching a wider consumer audience, be it through different products or kind of punching through that ceiling and going to the other side of the aisle where 85% of the beer is being sold. Does that mean that craft brewers need to sell products that are not what you guys are currently known for making in order to get there?
I think it's just your approach to market, and I think it's it's hard work and it's discipline, and it's making the sales calls, it's getting the right shelf position, it's looking at the market. There's a whole lot. We've heard this time and time again. I got somebody to try this, and now they're not going back. So we have to do more of that. I don't think we dumb down what we do. I think we find a better way to communicate it. I also think that as an industry, and in Maryland, we just had a terrible legislative session. And part of the issue was definitely driving a wedge between the brewers and the wholesalers and the retailers. And as an industry, and to your point, Laura, we're the stewards of the future of this industry. So that's a significant but wonderful burden. But we need to find ways to try to build common grounds for our mutual benefit with our wholesalers. And too often, those relationships are at loggerheads. And to a certain extent, the retailers are a little easier to deal with, but they're heavily dependent on the wholesalers. We got to find ways to communicate. There are some issues in the industry that need to be liberalized, but there's also some regulatory stuff I'd love to see come in, which kills this goddamn pay-to-play crap that need to be looked at.
Yeah.
So this is the positive effect of guys. We got work to do.
Yeah. And I too. I don't think you're dumbing down your brand, but a great example is, you know, we had a very hard time at the brewery discussing the notion of bringing all day out because it was 4.7%, and that just was not what Founders DNA was built on. And you know, but we built the beer for ourselves, and we enjoyed that beer, and it's very craft. If you've had it, it's very craft flavored, and it tore it up, and we started to look at something and start to think, you know, we're reaching a different audience with that beer that we weren't before. What the fuck's wrong with that?
Nothing. That's great.
So I would say, I would argue that yes, you will have to design to break through the ceiling. Craft can't only sell to craft.
Right.
You will, otherwise there will become no more room.
75 IBU beers are only going to go so far.
But it's going to cost you money, and it's going to be a lot of effort, and it's going to be things and thoughts and out-of-the-box stuff that you probably don't currently do. But there's going to have to be a handful that say, the hell with it, we're going there.
At the same time that we've seen all this incredible growth just in the number of breweries and the amount of actual barrels being output by craft breweries over the last 5-6 years, we have witnessed the larger players get into the space in a much more significant way than they ever have been. AB with 10 breweries, Miller Coors with 4 breweries, Heineken, Constellation. They're all involved now. They're all playing. And they're bringing some significant resources to the table for those brands.
You think?
Is that a positive, a negative for the category? Can those companies actually help open up the box a little bit? Or are you guys still concerned about their intentions within the space?
You want to go first?
Well, Hugh's got to. You go ahead.
I don't think there's any choice. You have to be concerned. I mean, the biggest area of concern for me is in those markets that are driven by chains, because those buyers would like to see the fewest number of people possible. And if AB and Miller Coors and Constellation and Heineken are going to go in there and then place all these portfolios, how many shelf spots are going to be left for the smaller independent guys? So that's to me the great danger. I don't know whether the fact that maybe they help grow beer, which then gets into Mike's position about maybe we can brunch through. I don't know that I see that coming from them, but I could be wrong. I just don't know. I mean, if I could count on both feet and both hands the number of times I've been wrong in the last week, I would think I had a good week. So
they have a lot more flexibility with pricing. You look at certain markets and see $25 kegs of IPA or of some sort, and that's really hard to compete with.
$25 kegs.
I
hope those are 6 barrels.
Shit happens, And these are the kinds of things that we have to navigate. So as breweries, we have to be, hitting the street. We have to have those relationships with our retailers. We have to be out there educating our wholesalers and our retailers and their staff about why it's worth it to buy from you, I guess, or from.
Mike, you're right in the middle of all
I think
this.
it's access. It's access.
Literally, with your position here on the stage and the position that your company is in.
Yeah, no, I think it's access to market and materials. I mean, that's the levers they can pull.
Yep.
And that's the danger. I know we don't want to get into the definition and everything, but I fundamentally have a problem with, who gives a shit what your ownership structure looks like. When ABI buys something, do we really care what the shareholder structure looks like? No. What everyone gets all upset about is, holy shit, now they can force that beer down everyone's throat, or they can tie up all the hops, and then I can't. So the real problem is as they purchase these breweries over here, and by the way, I know those folks, and God bless them. That's the American dream. You did it. I don't blame them for selling, but now they're in this camp. To me, what defines independent is these breweries not in this camp, the ones that still have to go to work every day, make beer, put the shit in their car, and go sell it, and don't have the levers that are present over here. It has nothing to do with your ownership. It's more about the access to market and how you can monopolize that marketplace. That's the fundamental problem.
Yeah, and that access to market and thinking about the middle tier, which is consolidating, and just all the sheer amount of brands that are trying to fight for that access to market. I mean, that seems to be the bottleneck right now. It's almost, I've heard it described, I think it might have been Brett Joyce at Rogue, who describes it sort of as an hourglass. You have all of these brands at the top of the hourglass, and there's a really small hole to fit through, and that's the distribution. And then you get out to all the consumers and all the retailers at the bottom of the hourglass. And unless that hole widens, the brands aren't getting through as fast as they need to be for the category to grow. So. I guess in a really long-winded way of saying, what do you think about that theory, and how are you guys approaching that challenge of making it through the middle of the hourglass?
It's relationship. I mean, it is really relationships with your distributor partners to, work with them, to Mike's point on saying, we want you to want to sell bells, right? We want this to be a bread and butter brand for you so that you can count on it, and that when you're out there selling it, that it's going to support you, as a distributor rep on the street. So it's really about that communication, presence, being available, and supporting them, and then also being open to having tough conversations. I mean, it is very challenging to move distributors in a lot of places. And when we approach it, we look at it as a partnership. We go through a pretty exhaustive process to pick them because we want to be with them for a long time. The amount of time and energy and money that you put into selecting those partners is huge. And so to get through that hole, you got to have a great working relationship, and it's, be able to talk about the shit when it comes up,
It's hard because we all have different perspectives up here, in where our breweries are at. But there's also a world of brewers out there, which it wasn't. But 10 years ago, we were 6,000 barrels. So to me, it's very real, and I get it. And it's going to be tough for the smaller breweries to get out into the marketplace, and that's what sucks. That's the hard part. So we got to make the fucking hole wider, I guess, is what we got to do. And the only way to do that is for us that are of larger size to kind of pave that way. And it might mean lesser margins. It might mean, more bodies, more people, more CE spend to widen that hole so that you can convince Mr. Distributor that, hey, we should go through that funnel as well. I get that you got all of your brands that ABI owns or whatever, but you make that process just as easy as it is for them to sell those brands as it is for your brand, and then maybe you start to get the funnel a little bit wider. But
can I respond? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well,
yeah.
We made it up, or my dad made it up as he went along, right? Because there weren't a lot of other breweries out there. Hugh, you did, I'm sure, and you guys. Yep. And the rules are different now, though, for smaller breweries. There are expectations of quality, of salesmanship, of understanding how the business works. And so, yes, I mean, the bigger breweries can help create that hole, but it's also on the responsibility of the brewery to understand how to go out and sell beer and have feet on the street and support their brands without the expectation that their distributor partner is just going to do it for them. So I think there's a lack of, or sometimes a lack of understanding of what the requirements are on the brewery side.
But I also think that that we need to begin to talk about the F word, franchise, because and by definition, none of us, well, all of you guys, and in some markets me, are getting a disproportionately large amount of attention from your wholesaler than your merit, your size in their house would dictate. If it's an AB house, 95% of their business is AB driven, and if you're doing really well, you're getting more than 5% of the attention. So we have to acknowledge that, one. But two, how many brands can a wholesaler really manage?
Right.
And there are wholesalers out there that are wonderful people with tremendous integrity, and if you go to them and say, this isn't working, I'd like to move, and they say, got it. But then there's also people that are brand collectors and will get your brand in the house and then just sit on it because they don't want the competition. And I respect our wholesalers. I want them to be secure in their business, but we have to solve that problem.
Yeah, and you know
that's the only way I see that you make that hole a little bigger.
The franchise reform issue is something we could spend an entire panel on itself.
Hell yeah.
And you know, I think actually later today we are going to get into that with our distributor disruptor panel, and maybe it's more of a case where the middle tier itself just needs to evolve.
Well, it's all part of the whole maturation curve. I mean, in fairness to our distributor partners, they never anticipated the level of complexity that they're dealing with in the market right now.
Right.
And we need to be respectful of that. I don't want to hurt these people. The middle tier is the reason craft beer has become successful. So we have to acknowledge that. We just need to find a way. If we need to mature as suppliers, they need to mature as the middle tier. Right. And if we can find a way to do that where everybody benefits, that would be fucking awesome.
We sell internationally to 26 countries, and it's an absolute shit show. It's the Wild West because the brewers own the retail.
Yep.
They have 2,000 pubs, and I'll tell you, the three-tier system, it's the best system for delivering beer to the marketplace in the world.
No doubt about it.
It is.
Mike, you're going to get yourself on the NBWA website tomorrow, and then Lester Jones this year.
Right?
You're going to have a big block quote on there, I think. Yeah. Well, guys, this has been great. I know we're already over time, so thank you very much for joining me.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate how candid you were. Round of applause for these guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.